Welcome to the MetsBlog Round Table, brought to you by RAM. I'm Matt Cerrone from MetsBlog.com, and I'm joined today by Marc Carig from Newsday, Pete McCarthy from WOR, and Anthony DiComo from MLB.com. And in a previous segment, we talked a little bit about payroll and talked about the pitchers and what that's going to mean going forward. But in a more real sense, this season, 2016, how does that sort of pending financial situation and how to deal with these guys, DeGrom, Harvey, Syndergaard, Matz, Wheeler, to a certain extent, what does that do for this season and how do they handle them? They've got a lot of pitchers, a lot of guys. You can make the argument when Wheeler comes back that someone's expendable. What do you think? I mean, what would your GM, what are you doing with these guys, especially when Wheeler comes back?
Well, I'm talking to everybody in spring training. That's when you want to try to figure out these extensions and just get an idea of who loves being a Met, who wants to be here long term, what they're thinking. I mean, obviously you have to include the agents and all of that. But I think that's step one, and you kind of feel it out from there. And they don't have to make a decision until I think next offseason. And even then, they could go beyond it. But next offseason, I think, is when it really starts, and you got to really decide who's in it for the long term and who might be more oriented to hit free agency.
Who do you think is the most prime to accept and want to work on that kind of an extension?
Marc's going to disagree with me, I know. I think it's Noah Syndergaard. I just think this guy's makeup, his character, I think he loves being a Met. You see his Instagram account and all that and everything he's done this winter. I think he really embraces that. And I just get the sense from this guy that he would be amenable, at least to talking about it. Look, at the end of the day, you might not be able to lock up any of these guys because they have to want to do it. They have to want to say, I'm going to forego some of my prime money-making years in order to have guaranteed money now and stay here in a place I like and a place I'm comfortable. At the end of the day, they might all say no, and that's their prerogative, and it has nothing to do with the Mets or anything else. It's their right as players to earn that. If any of those three, and I'm sort of discounting Steven Matz at this point because I don't think the Mets are going to be very interested right now given his injury history. But as far as Syndergaard, DeGrom, Harvey, I think Syndergaard's the guy, just given his makeup, that would be interested in at least talking about it and at least thinking about making a long-term commitment to the Mets.
Is anyone worried that he will eventually need Tommy John surgery?
If he does, he does. And he's the one guy of that group who hasn't had it, and I get the concern. But the history of the surgery at this point, you have to say, look, if we sign him to a long-term deal and he misses a year and he comes back, we'll assume he's going to be good again. So I wouldn't be worried enough, put it that way, to not sign him based on the fact that he hasn't had the surgery.
Did you do that on purpose? That the guy that looks like Ivan Drago, you just went and said, if he does, he does. So that was pretty nice. That's a nice touch right
Any
there.
Rocky reference I can make, I will make.
Okay, then clearly you just did. But I would say DeGrom, like going back to the original question. And I kind of disagree with Tony there, as he anticipated. Yeah. But when you look at just where he is in his career, he's a little older too. I think there might be a sweet spot there where, there could be some interest on both sides. And I think some of the things that you talked about with Syndergaard applies to DeGrom, too, as far as makeup and all that. I think the thing that people forget about players is that they're people, and people have a hard time. And this is everyone. I'm not saying it's just Jake DeGrom or anybody else. I just think, overall, the big factor is going to the unknown. That's difficult. Okay, this guy's been a Met his entire professional career, and I think that means a lot. I think that means a lot to a lot of guys, and I guess that's just being part of, the human condition, right? Like you are comfortable with what you know. So I think maybe there's something there as far as a intersection of mutual interest.
And remember this too, just this past offseason we saw Yoenis Cespedes take less money to be a Met. Bartolo Colon reportedly had bigger offers. He decided to come back and be a Met. We saw Wilmer Flores cry last year. We saw Zach Wheeler call up Sandy Alderson at the trade deadline and say they want to stay. Well, that becomes a factor at some point. Do you want to stay? Do you not? If guys are unhappy in the organization, then they're more likely to go to free agency. It doesn't hurt that it does seem that the franchise has made this turn where guys enjoy wearing the blue and orange.
Well, the reason why I disagree with you, Marc, and real quickly, you have to look at it from a Mets perspective, too. You can't sign all these guys. It would cost you $1 billion, right? Mm-hmm. So do you want to commit that money to Jacob deGrom, who's going to be in his 30s when he hits free agency because he was an older prospect, kind of a non-prospect? How long do you commit to a guy like that? Do you pay him guaranteed money through his age 33, age 34 season? Mm-hmm. I'm not sure they would like to do that over versus a guy like Noah Syndergaard who's still very young, and again, yeah, there's an injury risk there, but very young and would have time to recover, you could sign him to a longer-term deal.
You'd have to give him like 8 years at this point. He's still 6 years from free agency, so that would be a huge contract to give
He's a good pitcher.
I mean, but 8 years for any pitcher, as we've seen in the past, is generally alarming.
But if you're going to commit to someone, right, and that's the discussion, who do you commit to? I think Noah Syndergaard's got the highest ceiling of anyone.
I think it goes to show there's no rush.
Well, and again, there's a difference, I think, in how we're looking at this. There's a baseball perspective where, like, okay, ideal world, sure. Right? Perfect argument, and I agree with that. I'm kind of looking at it from the pragmatic standpoint, like, okay, what's a bit more realistic? What might be within the range? And I think because of the factors we talked about with Jake, maybe that's where this thing goes. But I think overall, they just got to keep a couple of these guys. I mean, the idea that you're going to keep all of them together, I think, is far-fetched for various reasons. And we already know this. I think if you're a Met fan that's watched these guys, appreciate the fact that it is rare to have that many guys together. And you have no idea whether it'll actually happen for the long term, given injuries and all that stuff. So, in the short term, like, you realize it's rare. And keep that in the back of your mind moving forward to keep them all together.
And this conversation is actually why I think it's possible someone could get dealt. When Zach Wheeler comes back, let's say, just because you're right, you can't keep them all. The iron's hot. This is a good opportunity. This might be a time to make a move like that, so we'll see what happens. But I thank you guys for coming. I guess that'll be the sequel to the conversation. So, remember, bookmark SNY.TV and MetsBlog.com for more roundtable videos and full coverage of Mets spring training in Port St. Lucie, Florida.